Settle in now, and let your shoulders soften. Let the room grow quiet around you, and the day fall away like a coat you no longer need to carry. Tonight, we travel together, slowly and gently, to a small place in the rural American South, to a sharecropper's cabin tucked among pine trees and red clay roads on the morning of January 31st, 1919. The cabin is modest, the kind of home built from rough-cut pine and tar paper, its tin roof catching the first hush of dawn light. Outside, the world is still wrapped in winter's hand, gentle, dim, blue at the edges. A thin mist drifts low across the peanut fields, curling over the furrows like soft wool. Somewhere far off, a rooster begins to stir, but it does not yet crow. The morning is not in a hurry. Nothing here is in a hurry. Inside the cabin, by the warm orange glow of a kerosene lamp, a child has just been born. His name is Jackie Roosevelt Robinson. He is the youngest of 5, a small bundle of new life held close against his mother's chest, his breath as soft as the breath of morning doves in the eaves. His mother's name is Mallie McGriff Robinson. And in this quiet hour, with frost at the window pane and a pine knot smoldering low in the iron stove, she looks down at her son and whispers a prayer, gentle, certain, woven from a faith older than the fields themselves. Outside, the land breathes. This is Cairo, Georgia, in the southern reaches of a long, slow country. The earth here is the color of cinnamon and old brick, soft beneath bare feet in summer, stubborn in the cold. All around the cabin, peanut fields stretch in tidy rows, their winter-brown vines tucked against the soil, resting beneath a quilt of frost. Beyond the fields, long-leaf pines stand tall and patient, their needles whispering in the slightest breeze, as if sharing secrets too gentle for daylight. A creek runs nearby, slow and steady, carrying the cold of January over smooth stones. In its banks, the roots of cypress trees curl like sleeping fingers. A heron stands somewhere along the water's edge, motionless, gray and grave, watching for nothing in particular. The world feels held in the soft palm of an early Georgia morning. As the months unfold, the seasons turn the way they always do here. Spring arrives shyly, with dogwood blossoms drifting like white moths through the woods. Summer follows, slow and generous, and the fields warm to a deep, living green. By dusk, the cicadas begin their long lullaby, a soft, electric hum rising from the pines, washing over the cabin like a tide. Fireflies lift out of the tall grass, blinking their small lanterns in no particular pattern, simply rising and falling, as cicadas sing their endless evening song. Inside the cabin, baby Jackie grows. He is the youngest of the household, watched over by his older brothers and sister, rocked in the strong, sure arms of his mother. Mallie sings to him as she works, old hymns, soft and slow, the words rising from somewhere deep, somewhere ancestral. She sings as she stirs grits over the stove. She sings as she folds laundry on the porch, while the screen door creaks gently in the breeze. She sings, and the cicadas sing, and the pines sing, and somewhere in the wide quiet of those Georgia afternoons, a small boy learns the rhythms of love. But Mallie is also a woman who looks far ahead. She sees the long road her children must travel. She sees the fields that have given their family so little for so much labor. She feels, even on the gentlest evenings, the weight of an unjust world pressing on the shoulders of the South. And in her heart, quietly, patiently, like the slow gathering of summer clouds, she begins to imagine a different horizon. A place farther west. A place called California, where her brother has written of orange trees and ocean light, of schools and sidewalks, and a chance for something more. For now, though, in these earliest months of Jackie's life, the world is small and warm. The cabin holds him. The fields hold him. The pines hold him. The cicadas weave their evening hymn, and the fireflies float their little flames, and Mally hums her old, hopeful songs into the quiet dark. And as the moon rises over Cairo, Georgia, full and pale above the longleaf pines, a baby boy sleeps in his mother's arms, already loved, already cherished, already carried, gently, toward a future neither he nor anyone could yet imagine. A year and some months pass, soft as turning pages, and the boy who sleeps beneath the Cairo moon grows into a sturdy little thing of 16 months, round-cheeked, dark-eyed, wobbling after his older brothers through the dust of the dooryard. His name is Jack Roosevelt Robinson, though in the small white house on the tenant farm they mostly call him Jackie, or simply Baby, or Come Here, Sweet Thing, in the easy music of his mother's voice. But the world beyond the longleaf pines has grown harder, not gentler. The fields ask more than they give. The white landlord's gaze has cooled. And so, one tender spring evening in 1920 and 20, Mally Robinson makes a quiet decision at the edge of her kitchen table. A decision shaped of equal parts faith and fear, and the particular stubborn hope that belongs only to mothers. She will go west. She will take her 5 children all the way across the wide American map to a place she has only heard of in letters, Pasadena, California, where her half-brother Burton says the orange trees grow heavy and the schools welcome every child the same. And so it is that, on a soft May morning, the Robinsons gather at the little depot in Cairo. Mally wears her best dress, plain and pressed, and her good Sunday hat. The children clutch what small bundles they can carry. There is Edgar, the eldest, serious as a deacon. There is Frank, whose laugh is easy. There is Mac, already long-legged and quick. There is Willa May, 4 years old, holding tight to her mother's skirt. And there is Jackie, the littlest one, balanced upon Mally's hip, his small fist curled in the fabric at her shoulder, as though he has always known to hold on. The train comes whistling through the morning mist, all iron and steam and patient power. They climb aboard the Jim Crow car at the back, and Mally settles her little flock onto a wooden bench, and the great wheels turn, and the pines of Georgia begin, slowly, to slip away. Clack, 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 clack. The rails sing their old rocking song, the song that has carried so many tired travelers towards so many quiet hopes. Out the window, the cotton fields drift past in long, pale rows. Red clay roads curl into the distance. A heron lifts from a still green creek. Jackie watches it all from his mother's lap, his eyelashes heavy, his small breath warm against her neck. The train rolls on through Alabama, through Mississippi, across the broad, muddy gleam of the great river itself. Day folds into evening. Evening softens into night. Mally sings under her breath the old hymns, the lullabies her own mother sang, soft as feathers, soft as water, and one by one the children sleep. When morning comes, the world has changed. The cotton is gone. The pines are gone. In their place, a vast and golden country opens, stretching wide as a held breath. Texas spreads its long grasslands beneath an enormous sky. Cattle drift like slow brown clouds. Dust devils spin and unspin themselves in the empty distance. The train climbs into New Mexico, where the earth turns the color of cinnamon and rose, where the mesas stand like patient sleeping giants, where the sun sets in great slow ribbons of apricot and lavender that the children press their small noses to the glass to see. Across Arizona they roll, beneath stars so thick and close it seems a person might gather them in handfuls. Saguaros lift their soft green arms in the moonlight. The desert air smells of dust and sage, and the faint sweetness of some far blooming thing. Jackie sleeps and wakes, and sleeps again, lulled by the steady rocking, by the warmth of his mother, by the murmur of his brothers, breathing. Mally does not sleep much. She watches the country pass. She thinks of the small house she has left behind, and the larger house she has not yet seen. She thinks of her babies, all 5 of them, and what their lives might become in this place she has only imagined. She does not know. How could she? That the smallest one curled against her, the boy with the steady gaze and the quiet, watchful patience, will one day walk onto a green field and, by the simple act of being himself, change the heart of a nation. She knows only this, that the wheels are turning, that the West is coming closer, that the orange groves are waiting somewhere out beyond the long horizon. And so she holds him, and hums, and lets the rails carry them gently on. Clack. Clack. Clack, clack. Toward Pasadena. Toward tomorrow. Toward whatever lies, gleaming and unguessed, in the long sweet light ahead. And tomorrow, when it came, smelled of orange blossoms. Pasadena received them softly, the way a quilt receives a tired traveler. The streets were broad and sun-warmed, lined with pepper trees, whose feathery branches whispered together like old friends sharing a secret. Mally carried her 5 children into this new chapter, the way she carried everything, with steady hands and a heart tuned to grace. She was looking for a home, and in time, on a quiet lane called Pepper Street, she found one. It was a modest house. A small white frame, a patch of grass, a porch wide enough for a rocking chair, and the slow work of evening prayer. The neighbors at first were not always kind. Some looked twice at the dark-skinned family on their tidy block and looked away. But Mally did not flinch. She had carried her children across half a continent. She would not be moved by a chilly glance. She planted herself there as firmly as the pepper trees themselves, and over time the street learned the shape of her quiet dignity and made room. Inside that little house, there was always something on the stove. Beans simmering low. greens with a whisper of bacon. Cornbread golden as the California sun, Mally worked as a domestic, scrubbing other people's floors, washing other people's linens, and yet she came home each evening with enough left in her to gather her children close and remind them, in her soft, unshakable voice, that they were loved by God and meant for good things. She did not preach it. She lived it. And the children, watching her, learned that faith was not a Sunday garment, but a daily walking shoe. Young Jackie was the baby of the brood, small and quick and curious. He toddled after his older brothers, Edgar with his careful hands, Frank with his gentle laugh, Mac with his long, long legs. Especially Mac. By the door, always, sat Mac's running shoes, worn at the heel, scuffed at the toe, lined up like patient horses waiting to ride. Mac ran the way some boys breathed, easily, as if the wind itself were carrying him. And little Jackie, watching his brother fly down the Pasadena sidewalks, decided early that he too would learn to move. The afternoons stretched long in those days. School let out, and the boys spilled into the yards in lots of Pepper Street like water finding its level. They played everything. Marbles in the dust, tag through the sprinklers, stickball with a broom handle and a worn rubber ball that had bounced through a dozen summers. And as the sun lowered itself behind the San Gabriel Mountains, painting the sky in peach and rose and slow lavender, they played baseball, sandlot baseball, at dusk, on a patch of bare ground rubbed smooth by 1,000 small feet. The bases were flat stones, or maybe an old shirt, or whatever could be spared. The bat was passed hand to hand, warm from the last batter's grip. And Jackie, even then, even small, played with a fierce and joyful concentration. He chased every ball. He slid into every base. He ran as if running itself were a kind of singing, a thing the body did because the heart had something to say. The neighborhood watched. Old men on porches. Mothers calling supper. The other boys, who quickly learned that the smallest Robinson did not stop, did not tire, did not give an inch. He was beaten, sometimes, by older arms and longer legs. But he was never discouraged. He simply waited for the next pitch, the next play, the next chance. And then the dinner bell. Mally's voice, low and certain, drifting down the lane. The boys would come trotting home, dust on their knees, grass on their elbows, their faces flushed with the gold of the dying day. They would wash at the basin, sit at the table, bow their heads. Mally would speak the blessing, short, simple, deeply meant, and the food would pass from hand to hand. After supper, the orange blossom evenings. That was what the neighborhood called them. The trees in the yards bloomed white and fragrant, and the air on Pepper Street grew thick with sweetness. The children sat on the porch steps. The crickets tuned their patient instruments. Somewhere down the block, a radio played, faint as a memory. Jackie would lean against his mother's knee, and Mally would hum, low and steady, an old hymn she had carried up from Cairo. And the small boy, with sandlot dust still on his shoes and tomorrow already running ahead of him, would close his eyes just for a moment and breathe in the sweet, warm, settling night. The years drifted by the way, slow rivers do, quietly, with a hush of cottonwoods along the bank, with the gold of one season folding gently into the silver of the next. The boy who had once leaned against his mother's knee grew tall and lean and graceful, the way young trees grow when the soil beneath them is good. And one warm September, with the Pacific light pouring soft as honey over the rooftops of Los Angeles, Jackie Robinson stepped onto the campus of the University of California at Los Angeles, where the buildings were white as folded linen and the lawns lay green and patient beneath the eucalyptus trees. Westwood, in those days, was a place of long, easy avenues and red-tile roofs, of jacaranda blooming in lavender drifts when the spring came round. The campus seemed almost to drowse in the afternoon sun, its arches and quadrangles holding the warmth the way an old stone hearth holds the memory of a fire. And through it all walked Jackie, 20 years old, his shoulders square, his stride unhurried, a soft canvas duffel slung across his back, his eyes taking in everything with the same quiet wonder he had carried since boyhood. He came to UCLA as a transfer from the junior college down the road, and the coaches there had been waiting for him the way one waits for a long-promised letter. And what Jackie gave them, season after season, was something the school had never quite seen before. He became the first athlete in the history of UCLA to letter in 4 varsity sports, baseball in the spring, with the crack of the bat echoing across Joe E. Brown Field, basketball in the winter, on the polished oak floors of the gymnasium, where the lamplight glowed amber against the rafters. Football in the autumn, in a leather helmet worn smooth from use, his cleats kicking up little plumes of chalk-white dust, and track in between, his long legs eating up the cinder lanes as the spectators leaned forward and held their breath. 4 sports. 4 uniforms folded neatly in his locker, each smelling faintly of grass or rosin or cedar. 4 sets of teammates who learned, one by one, that the quiet young man among them did not boast and did not bristle, but simply showed up and showed up and showed up, and quietly, almost without seeming to try, became the finest athlete on the field. The newspapers began to take notice. They called him the Bruin Bullet and the Dark Destroyer, and a dozen other names that did not quite fit, because none of them caught the thing that mattered most about him. The steadiness of his breathing, the calm in his eyes, the way he moved through a stadium of 50,000 voices as though he were still a small boy on a Pasadena sandlot, listening for the soft hum of his mother's hymn beneath the noise of the world. And in the evenings, when the games were over and the great floodlights had cooled, Jackie would walk back to his dormitory with the sweat drying on his collar and the cool ocean wind moving through the palms. The hallways smelled of floor wax and old wood. The radiators ticked. From somewhere far down the corridor, a phonograph would be playing a slow ballad. Bing Crosby, perhaps, or Ella Fitzgerald, the notes drifting through the doorways the way candlelight drifts through linen curtains. It was on one of those quiet, settling evenings that he first saw her. Her name was Rachel Azon. She was a freshman studying nursing, with kind eyes and a soft, considered laugh. She had heard of him. Everyone had heard of him. But when they met, in a small gathering of friends near the student lounge, what struck her first was not the famous athlete at all, but the gentleness in his voice and the way he listened fully when she spoke. He noticed her in turn, the steady warmth of her, the patience, the quiet dignity she carried the way his mother had carried hers. They did not fall in love that night. Love, the real kind, takes its time, like a river finding its bed. But something began. A folded note. A walk along the sidewalks of Westwood, the street lamps blooming on, one by one. A shared cup of cocoa in the dorm common room while the rain whispered against the windows. And outside, in the soft California dark, the campus settled into its long, hushed sleep, the oak floors cooling, the leather helmets resting on their shelves, and Jackie Robinson, four-sport marvel of UCLA, breathing slow and even in a room where, somewhere just beyond the wall, the future was already waiting, patient as the stars. The stars kept their patient watch, and the years moved on as years do, softly, without announcement, the way a tide turns in the dark. By the time the calendar slipped into the spring of 1942, the world had grown louder. Newspapers bloomed with maps and arrows, and the radios and kitchen windows hummed with the names of distant places, places ordinary people were learning to pronounce for the first time. Jackie Robinson, no longer the boy in the leather helmet, no longer the four-sport marvel of Westwood, folded his civilian life into a duffel bag and stepped, like so many young men of his generation, into the long, quiet line that led to the United States Army. Fort Riley, Kansas. Picture it now, in your mind's gentle eye. A wide prairie sky, the color of washed denim. Wheat fields rolling out in every direction like a slow golden sea, and the wind moving across them in patient, unhurried waves. The barracks stood in tidy rows, their wooden walls warm in the afternoon sun, and at evening the bugle would sound and 1,000 boots would still themselves on 1,000 polished floors. Jackie trained there as a cavalry soldier, and later as an officer candidate. He learned the careful geometry of marching, the soft click of a saluted hand, the names of the small parts of large machines. He rose in time to the rank of second lieutenant, a young man with bars on his shoulders and the same quiet, measuring eyes he had carried since boyhood in Pasadena. His uniform was pressed each morning, the creases sharp as folded paper, and when he walked across the parade ground, his shadow stretched long and steady before him, the way a runner's shadow stretches at the start of a race. Then, in the gentle turning of the seasons, the Army moved him south to Fort Hood in the broad cattle country of central Texas. The land there was different, flatter, dustier, the live oaks twisted like old men leaning into a patient wind. The summer evenings carried the smell of warm grass and far-off rain, and the sky at sundown turned the color of ripe peaches, soft and slow and lingering. And it was on one such evening in the early days of July 1944 that our story arrives at a small, perfectly ordinary moment, the kind of moment that history sometimes lifts up in its quiet hands and holds to the light. Jackie boarded an Army bus at the post hospital on his way back to his quarters. He took a seat near the middle, beside the wife of a fellow officer, a friend, a familiar face. The bus rolled forward, its tires hushing along the warm asphalt, the windows half open to let in the soft Texas dusk. Outside, the cicadas were beginning their long evening hymn, and the first fireflies were lifting from the pastures like tiny lanterns set adrift on a still pond. The driver glanced into his mirror and called back to him. "Move to the rear," the man said. "Move to the back of the bus." Now, by the laws and customs of that time, Army buses on military posts had been desegregated, an order signed on paper in distant offices in Washington. Jackie knew this. He had read it. He had carried that knowing inside him the way one carries a small, smooth stone in a pocket. So he stayed where he was. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand. He simply sat, with the calm and steady posture he had carried onto 100 ball fields, and he said, in a tone as quiet as the evening itself, that he would not move. The bus rolled on, slower now, the air inside grown still. The driver's jaw tightened. Voices rose around him, then fell. And Jackie Robinson, second lieutenant of the United States Army, kept his seat, a young man holding a small piece of dignity in his lap, as gently as one might hold a sleeping bird. What followed in the days afterward? The military police summoned, the questions asked, the court-martial that would eventually, and rightly, find him not guilty. All of that lay just beyond the horizon, waiting. But on that summer evening, in the soft Texas dusk, there was only the hum of the tires, the slow drift of fireflies beyond the windows, and a single, quiet refusal that, though no one yet knew it, was rehearsing the deeper refusal still to come. The bus reached its stop. Jackie stepped down into the warm, grass-scented air. Somewhere, far across the pastures, a whippoorwill called once, and then again, its voice gentle as a hand smoothing a blanket. Above him, the first stars were just beginning to show themselves, patient, as always, as if they had been waiting all along. And so we drift onward, dear listener, into a chapter cut from sturdier cloth, the chapter where a young man, lately a soldier, set down his uniform and reached, instead, for a worn leather glove. The year was 1945, and the war was folding itself away like a great mat being smoothed and put back into a drawer. Jackie, mustered out of the Army with an honorable discharge tucked carefully into his coat, stepped into the spring of that long, weary year and found himself looking, once again, for a place where his hands could speak. And the place that opened its door, gently, without flourish, was the Kansas City Monarchs of the Negro Leagues. Picture, if you will, a wooden clubhouse at the edge of a sun-warmed diamond. Picture pressed flannels hanging in a tidy row, each jersey lettered in a careful, unhurried script. Picture the soft creak of cleats on a plank floor, and the low, easy laughter of men who had earned, by long miles and longer summers, the right to laugh easily. This was the world Jackie entered. Not the bright ballparks the country wrote about in its newspapers, but a quieter circuit, its own constellation, hung modestly in the American sky, shining for those who knew where to look. The Monarchs traveled by bus, and the bus, dear listener, became a kind of slow, rolling parlor. Mile after mile, the road unspooled before them, past sorghum fields turning gold, past little towns with one stoplight and a hardware store, past white fences and red barns and cornstalks whispering in the breeze. The men dozed against folded jackets. Someone tuned a small radio. Someone else hummed a hymn from his grandmother's church. And at the front of the bus, the driver, calm as a steady heartbeat, kept watch on the horizon where the road met the sky in a soft blue seam. Jackie sat by the window. He liked the window. He watched telephone poles tick by like the second hand of a great, slow clock, and he let his thoughts settle the way river silt settles when a stream grows still. The towns they played in were segregated, and so the men knew, by long custom, which boarding houses would welcome them, which kitchens at the back of which diners would serve a late plate of meatloaf and greens after a doubleheader. These places, dear listener, were small lanterns along a long road. A woman named Miss Pearl, perhaps, in one town, who pressed extra biscuits into a paper sack for the bus. An old gentleman in another, who kept the porch light burning until the team arrived, no matter how late. Kindness, you see, has its own quiet league, and its standings are kept in a ledger no newspaper prints, On the field, the Monarchs were craftsmen. That is the proper word. Craftsmen. Men who had studied the geometry of a bunt, the patience of a curveball, the long art of reading a pitcher's shoulder. Jackie watched them and learned from them. Satchel Paige with his easy wind-up, Hilton Smith with his thoughtful eyes, Buck O'Neil with his steady, fatherly grin. They taught Jackie not only baseball, but a kind of bearing. How to stand, how to wait, how to carry oneself when the world had not yet decided to look. The crowds in the bleachers cheered with a sound that carried, somehow, the dust of an entire era, the dust of cotton fields and Pullman cars, of church socials and storefront barbershops, of grandfathers who remembered freedom as a thing newly given. When a Monarch laced a clean double down the line, that cheer rose up like a flock of birds taking the evening air, and for a moment the whole ballpark seemed lifted on its wings. After the games, in the small late hours, Jackie would sometimes find himself in a diner with a few teammates, the booth warm, the coffee dark, a slice of pie cooling on a thick white plate. The jukebox might play softly, Ella perhaps, or the ink spots, and the conversation would meander, the way conversations do when the day's work is finally done. Stories of cousins back home. Stories of a curveball that wouldn't curve. Stories that ended in chuckles and slow nods, and the gentle clink of a coffee cup returning to its saucer. And then back to the bus. Back to the road. Back to the soft hum of tires on the long American night, and the moon riding alongside, faithful as a porch light left on for a son still on his way home. It was, in its own quiet manner, a good season. A patient season. A season that was teaching Jackie, though he could not yet have named the lesson, exactly what he would need to know when at last, before too long, a different door would open. And so the door did open, though in the most ordinary of ways, with a knock and a quiet conversation, and a name spoken across a desk in a city far from the ball fields of his boyhood. It was an autumn afternoon in 1945, the kind of afternoon when the light in Manhattan turns the color of old honey, slipping low between the buildings and laying itself in long, warm rectangles across the sidewalks. The trees along the avenues had begun their slow surrender to gold. A small wind moved among them, lifting a leaf here, a hat brim there, and carrying with it the soft hush of a city easing toward evening. Somewhere, a streetcar bell rang, gentle as a wind chime, and far above, a flight of pigeons turned in unison and was gone. Inside a building of pale stone, on a floor high enough to see the rooftops marching off into the haze, there was an office lined with mahogany. The wood was dark and deep and old, and it had the polished glow of something loved by many hands across many years. A green shaded lamp threw its warm circle upon a broad desk. Books stood in patient rows along the walls, their spines softened by lamplight. The air carried the gentle scent of cigar smoke and leather and paper, the particular perfume of rooms where decisions are made slowly and well. Behind the desk sat a man with white hair and bushy brows and a great square face that had weathered many seasons. His name was Branch Rickey, president of the Brooklyn Dodgers, and he had spent a lifetime watching baseball with the patience of a man watching a river. He had been thinking for some time now about a thing that had not yet been done. He had been thinking about it carefully, and praying about it earnestly, and waiting, as good thinkers do, for the right name to find him. Across the desk sat Jackie. He had traveled a long way to be there, by train and by taxi, and by the soft determination of his own quiet stride. He sat with his hands folded, his cap upon his knee, and he listened. Mr. Rickey began to speak, and his voice was low and steady, the way a riverbed is low and steady beneath rushing water. He spoke of what lay ahead. He spoke of crowded grandstands and of voices rising from them, voices that would be cruel. He spoke of pitchers who might throw at a man's ribs, of runners who might spike a man's ankles, of clerks at hotel desks who might turn a man away into the rain. He spoke of waiters and porters and strangers in passing cars. He named the unkindness plainly, so that nothing would come as a surprise. And then, having laid it all upon the table like a heavy thing that must be examined, he leaned forward, and his eyes grew very kind. He said he was looking for a ball player with the courage not to fight back. Not a man without fire, for fire would be needed, but a man whose fire could be banked, kept low and warm and useful, so that it would not burn down the very house he was trying to enter. There was a quiet in the room then. The lamp hummed faintly. Somewhere outside, a clock in a tower struck the hour, the sound rolling soft and bronze across the rooftops. Jackie thought. He thought of his mother in Pasadena, of the long morning she had risen before the sun. He thought of his brother Mac, and of all the patient seasons in Kansas City. He thought of every word he had ever swallowed, and every word he had ever wished to speak. And then, with the calm of a man who has already made peace with a difficult road, he gave his answer. Yes. He could do this thing. He would do this thing. Mr. Rickey rose. Jackie rose. And across the polished desk, in the soft amber of that autumn afternoon, the two men reached out and shook hands. It was a quiet handshake. There were no cameras, no headlines, no brass bands waiting in the street. Only the gentle clasp of two palms in a mahogany room, and the small sound of a decision settling into the world like a stone settling into still water. Yet from that quiet circle the ripples would travel outward, slow and sure, across every diamond in every dusty town, across every grandstand and every kitchen radio, across the long green country itself. Outside, the honey-colored light shifted by another inch upon the sidewalks. The pigeons wheeled and resettled, and the city, knowing nothing yet of what had passed in that high room, went on about its evening, gentle and unaware. Winter loosened its grip slowly that year, the way a long-held breath finally eases from the chest. Snow gave way to slush to puddles that mirrored a paler sky, and one quiet morning in late February of 1946, Jackie and Rachel Robinson stepped down from a southbound train into air that smelled, impossibly, of oranges. They were newlyweds still, their wedding only a few weeks behind them, and they carried with them 2 suitcases, a thermos of coffee gone cool, and the soft, unspoken understanding that whatever lay ahead, they would meet it side by side. Florida, that spring, was a country of long afternoons. The light there was different from the light of California or New York, thicker somehow, golden as port honey, settling on everything with a kind of patient affection. In the citrus groves around Sanford, the trees stood in tidy rows, their dark leaves polished, their fruit hanging like small lanterns waiting to be lit. Bees moved among the white blossoms with a low, contented hum, and the scent of orange blossom drifted on every breeze, sweet and slightly drowsy, the way a lullaby is drowsy. The training fields were modest places. Patchy grass, chalk lines drawn by hand, dugouts of unpainted pine that smelled of warm sap when the sun rose high. The grandstands wore tin roofs that ticked and pinged as the day grew warmer, and beyond the outfield fences, palmettos rustled their fans, and mockingbirds practiced one another's songs from the tops of fence posts. Jackie pulled on a flannel uniform stitched with the word Claff Royals, and the wool was heavy in the southern heat, but he wore it lightly, the way a person wears a coat made for them by someone who loves them. There were bumps in those early weeks, small towns that turned them away, fields that closed their gates, ball games that were quietly canceled rather than played. But Rachel was steady as a lighthouse. She set up small kitchens in borrowed rooms, ironed shirts on tabletops, kept letters and laughter circulating like soft currents through their days. And Jackie, for his part, did what he had promised he would do. He played. He hit line drives that skipped through the infield grass like flat stones over still water. He stole bases with that easy, sudden grace of his, there one moment, gone the next, a sparrow lifting from a wire. He let his bat answer the questions that words, just then, could not. When spring softened into early April, the team turned northward, and the long train ride carried them up through pine woods and river valleys until at last the rails delivered them to Montreal. And here the story takes a gentler turn. For Montreal opened its arms to them, the city of stone churches and wrought iron balconies, of cobbled streets and bakeries breathing the scent of warm butter into the morning air. This city decided, almost as one, that it would love the young couple from across the border. Children ran beside Jackie on the sidewalks, calling his name in 2 languages. Grocers slipped extra apples into Rachel's basket. Their landlady on De Gaspé Avenue brought them fresh croissants on Sunday mornings and learned to say good morning in English just to greet them at the door. At Delormier Stadium, the crowds rose to their feet whenever Jackie stepped to the plate. In the small park down by the river, ducks paddled in steady circles, while couples on benches rustled the pages of newspapers carrying box scores with his name in them, and his name, that summer, was almost always at the top. He led the International League in batting. He led it in stolen bases. He played second base as if he had been born to the position, turning double plays with the quiet certainty of a clockmaker setting tiny gears into place. In the evenings, he and Rachel walked along streets where the maples were unfurling their first soft green leaves. Streetcars hummed past, their bells tinkling like distant wind chimes. From open windows came the sound of radios, accordion music, a woman singing in French, a baseball game, is more than baseball game, drifting out into the dusk and gathering listeners on porches and stoops. The city was, for that one summer, a kind of garden in which the Robinsons could simply be, husband and wife, young and tired and happy, walking home under lamplight, while the soft bowl of the northern sky filled slowly with stars. And so the seasons turned, as seasons do, gentle and unhurried, carrying the Robinsons from one chapter into the next. The leaves of Montreal browned and fell. Snow came and softened the rooftops, then melted into the long thaw of another spring. And on a Tuesday in April, the 15th to be exact, in the year 1947, Jackie awoke in a small hotel room in Brooklyn, New York, with a slow, sure feeling that the world outside his window was about to tilt, ever so slightly, towards something kinder. The morning was cool. A soft, cloud-pale sky stretched over the borough, and the air carried that particular hush of an April that has not quite committed to summer. Rachel laid out his clothes, the way she always did, with quiet care, smoothing the shoulders of his jacket. Their baby boy, only 5 months old, slept on with that bottomless sleep babies have, his small fist curled into the blanket. Jackie kissed the top of the child's warm head. Then he kissed Rachel. And then, without much ceremony, he stepped out into the day. Ebbets Field stood waiting in the heart of Flatbush. Oh, what a friendly old ballpark it was. A low brick and iron cathedral pressed in among the row houses and the corner stores, with this rotunda of marble and its ceilings painted the soft cream of an eggshell. As Jackie made his way toward the players' entrance, the streets around him began to fill, men in fedoras, women in spring coats, children clutching the sleeves of fathers and uncles, all of them moving in that slow, happy current that ballparks gather to themselves on opening day. Inside, the clubhouse smelled of liniment and laundered wool, of leather and pine and the faint sweetness of old wood. Number 42 hung in his locker, a clean white jersey with asterisk Dodgers asterisk stitched in blue across the chest. He pulled it on. He laced his spikes. Around him, his new teammates moved through their own quiet rituals, taping wrists, oiling gloves, murmuring the small jokes that ball players have always murmured to each other in the half-light of dressing rooms. Some met his eyes and nodded. Some did not. Either way, Jackie tied his laces with the steady hands of a man who had practiced patience until it became a kind of strength. Then, at last, the dugout. The tunnel out to the field was short and dim, smelling of damp concrete and chewing tobacco, and at its end was a bright rectangle of green. Jackie walked toward it, slowly, the cleats of his shoes clicking on the cement floor. And then he stepped through. The grass of Ebbets Field was the color of new spring, a deep, soft, manicured green, freshly cut and freshly chalked, the foul lines as white as fresh-laid linen. The infield dirt had been raked into gentle furrows. A breeze moved across it, lifting the smell of cut grass and warm peanuts and the faint, comforting tang of a hot dog cart somewhere beyond the right field wall. Above the stands, a few pigeons turned in lazy circles. The crowd murmured like a great friendly sea. 26,000 people had come that day, and more than half of them were black. Families who had ridden the subway in from Harlem, from Bedford-Stuyvesant, from neighborhoods that had waited, generation upon generation, for this very afternoon. They wore their Sunday best. The women carried small handbags. The men removed their hats. And when Jackie's name was announced over the loudspeaker, asterisk playing first base, number 42, Jackie Robinson, there rose from the stands a sound like a long, slow exhalation, half cheer and half sigh, the sound a people make when something they have hoped for, quietly for a very long time, finally arrives. He took his position. He bent at the knees. He punched his fist softly into the pocket of his glove. The peanut shells crackled underfoot in the box seats. Somewhere a child laughed. Somewhere an old man wept without making a sound. And the umpire, in his dark blue serge, lifted his mask and called out the two short words that, on every opening day since baseball began, have meant that winter is truly over and the world has been given another chance. The first pitch sailed in. The crowd leaned forward. And Jackie Robinson, son of Georgia sharecroppers, husband of Rachel, father of a sleeping baby boy, settled in, unhurried, to play the quiet, careful, history-making game of his life. And so the season unfolded the way long seasons do, slowly, slowly, like a summer evening gathering its colors. Base hits and stolen bases, dust on the cuffs, the soft thwack of a ball into a worn leather mitt. Jackie ran the way water runs downhill, easy, certain, finding its path. He stole home with a grin no camera ever quite caught. He turned double plays in the soft gold of late innings. And by the time the leaves above Brooklyn began to curl into autumn, the writers had a name for what he was. Rookie of the Year. The first ever to wear that title. He took the trophy home, of course, and set it somewhere quiet. A shelf, a side table, where Rachel could pass it on her way to the kitchen, and little Jackie Jr. could one day toddle up and touch the cool brass of it with small, curious fingers. The years that followed moved with the gentle rhythm of summers stitched together. There were all-star games where the cheers, at last, were simply cheers. There was an MVP award in 1949 with the photographers, bulbs flashing like quiet little stars. There were train rides through the long American night, the prairie sliding past the window, his teammates dozing in their seats, the porter dimming the lamps. And there was, in time, that golden October of 1955, when the Dodgers, his Dodgers, the Burrows heart on its sleeve, finally won the World Series. Brooklyn poured into the streets that night, like a river breaking its banks. Kitchen radios stayed on past bedtime. Stoop lights glowed late. Children fell asleep, clutching pennants, the celebration murmuring softly through their dreams. And then, the way all seasons must, his came to its quiet close. He hung up the spikes in 1956. He walked out of the locker room one last time and into the rest of his life, toward Rachel, toward his children, toward mornings that did not begin with the long whistle of a train. He worked, he wrote, he stood for things. He lent his voice to the patient, persistent work of justice. He grew older the way good men grow older, with gray at the temples and a little more weight to his words. And when he passed, in the autumn of 1972, the country paused just for a moment to feel how much smaller the field had become without him on it. But here is the gentle, glowing thing about a story like his. It does not end. It only deepens, the way a river deepens as it flows. 25 years on a soft April evening in 1997, the lights came up at Shea Stadium. Rachel stood on the grass, 50 years now beyond that first April afternoon. The president spoke. The crowd hushed. And then the announcement carried out across the diamond, and across every diamond in the country, and across every sandlot and little league field and dusty backyard where a child had ever swung a bat, that from this night forward, in every ballpark in the land, the number 42 would be retired. No one, ever again, would wear it. It would belong forever to him. And so it does. On summer nights now, in stadiums from Brooklyn to Los Angeles, from St. Louis to Seattle, you can still find that number, stitched onto an outfield wall, painted onto a foul pole, glowing softly in the blue dusk. Once a year, every player in the league pulls it on, all of them at once, a whole sport wearing the same small, quiet 42 in his memory. A gentle echo. A long, kind shadow stretching across the green. And maybe that is the truest measure of his courage. Not the headlines, not the trophies, not even the games themselves, but the way his name became a soft light that the country learned to read by, a reminder that the bravest acts are sometimes the most patient ones. That dignity, held quietly, can move a stadium. That a man with steady hands and a sleeping baby at home can lean into the world's hardest pitch and let it pass him by and step calmly to first base and change everything. So rest now. The lamps are low. The evening is long. Somewhere, a stadium is empty and the grass is cooling and the bases are tucked into their soft little shadows. Somewhere, a child is dreaming of a swing they have not yet taken. And somewhere, everywhere, the number 42 glows, gentle as a porch light left on for a traveler still finding his way home. Good night, friend. Good night, Jackie. Good night to the long, kind American evening, and to all who walk it bravely and quietly toward the morning.